Welcome on this beautiful morning to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Augusta. We return once again here together to create a beloved community, acting with compassion, reason, and respect, empowering us to promote a just society. We acknowledge that here in the CSRA, we reside in the lands of the Westo people, the Savannah Shawnees, and the Yuki peoples of the Muskogee Confederacy. I am Reverend Nic Filzen. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm proud to be working today with worship host Cheryl Martin, who's giving a last-minute assist as Chris Garcia is ill. Music director Josef Patchen is always a pleasure to have here with you, and of course, all of you. We are all making this moment together here in this week, here in our lives. If you are here in person as a visitor or as a virtual visitor, you are more than welcome. And if you're joining us via Zoom this morning, I'd like to invite folks to stay on the call for at least a few minutes following the service so you can say hi to each other. Now, we're going to try to establish that as the regular rhythm, but we can't stay too long this time today because we will have a congregational meeting for which you would have had to pre-register and get onto a new call after the service. So stick around for a touch, and then we'll see you for the next thing. And if you're here in person, I hope that you'll be willing to fill out a blue card that you can find in the seat pocket in front of you if you're a visitor, and share that with the greeters when you leave. That'll help us stay in touch going forward. And I hope you'll stay for a bit and say hi while we meet in the fellowship hall, the common room, after the service for some snacks and some coffee. And we'll know you as a visitor by that orange name tag. Whether you're here for the first time or the 1000th, in person or on Zoom, I sincerely hope you get what you need today. There's a fair amount going on in our shared lives right now, and I just want to mention a few. As I mentioned before, we will have an important congregational meeting following the service today, at which we will vote on our proposed new covenant, get an update on this year's budget, and hear how our membership is going. Everybody is invited to stay, yet only members will have the exclusive right to vote. Though ticket sales are going quite well for our January 27th Final Friday at UU Augusta jazz performance featuring Karen Gordon and friends, there are still seats. I think we've sold 38 seats so far, but we could definitely use some more people to kind of make this space and event feel great. We'd love you to come and share it with your friends. And I just want to give a shout out to Pam Hayward, who's been really instrumental in making sure that this event is successful. So thank you to her. Y'all, it's been a long time since we took a picture of the whole congregation. And Ed McCraney has generously offered to fix that situation. We've scheduled a primary option of next Sunday immediately following the service to take a picture. But if the weather doesn't cooperate, like today, we have a backup date of February 5th lined up too. And yes, this is extra incentive for you to come both weeks. Speaking of February 5th, that's when choir rehearsals will resume at 9:15 in the morning here in the sanctuary. If you have sung before, or if you would like to experience the camaraderie and joyful harmony of shared voices mingled in song, please come and join us as we begin our journey together to deliver beautiful, meaningful, and collaborative music to our congregation. And then finally, on February 15th, at Sacred Heart Chapel, our partners at the Progressive Religious Coalition are hosting their annual celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with an amazing guest speaker, Dr. Eddie Glaude. With the AU choirs and a scene performed by the Augusta Youth Players, performing arts will help to make the event even more powerful and meaningful for everyone who's there. Now I invite us to fully enter this time of worship, this time of meaning making, this time of joy. Together, we move into worship.
This morning's chalice lighting words are This Essential Work of Justice and Liberation for All by Rosemary Bray McNatt, president of Star King School for the Ministry. By no means are we Unitarian Universalists perfect. We often fail as much as we succeed. Yet even when, quote, we have broken our vows 1,000 times, unquote, we return to this essential work of justice and liberation for all. We do the work best when we remember what church is and what it is not. Church is not a place to hide. It is not the place to get away from the world. It is not a place where we get to pretend that the lives we live in our particular situation are not terribly complex, often confusing, and sometimes depressing. Church is the place where we rise with one another, look the world in the eye, and gather strength to face what we observe with courage and, yes, find joy.
As we sing hymn number 188, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. Most of you, I would like to sing what's on the page, and then there will be a part for the low voices as well, which we will do. So if we could sing through just one time through just the regular part on the page, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. So it would be... Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshipper, lover of leaving. There's no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Lovely, you sound beautiful. Now, the lower voices, the words that you will be singing are though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. And it's just a sort of rolling ostinato. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken vows. Yeah, so let's try that. And the way is how it'll come in there. So let's try that. Let's do the bass thing 2 times, and then we'll come in with the congregation, please. So here we go. Though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. Couple more times. Here we go. Thank you.
This is Marika Bhattacharya, and I'm a member of your pastoral care team. I am here to represent, in part, those who have challenges to their mental health. And this is the time when we get to share joys and sorrows that are shaping our lives. I'd like to invite each of you to share a joy or sorrow that you experienced fairly recently. And for those who are here in the congregation, you can come up and form a line.
All right, guys. So all the young and young at heart want to come down for story time with me, please? There we go. Yes! I have been saying young at heart so long. So good to have someone. All right. Foxy, you want to come see me, baby? It's okay. We'll hang out later. All right. So before I start today's book, I'm going to chat with y'all just a little bit, if y'all don't mind. So I'm going to be reading this short story called Listen to the Language of the Trees. I invite each of you, young and not so young, to think about what we might learn from these majestic and interdependent creatures about beloved community, about truth, about mutual accountability, and returning to love, about what we can depend on to keep us firmly rooted, and how we can fully bloom with the support of others. To me, this story is about faith, good, grounding faith. Okay? And let's begin. Listen to the language of the trees. The forest was full of chattering. A jay shrieked at a sniffing coyote. A squirrel scolded them from a low branch. The trees rustled as if whispering to each other. No one noticed the tiny little seedling pushing its way above the soil. Quietly, its needles stretched out in the cool darkness of the forest floor. It was a miracle that it even sprouted at all. As a seed, it had been tucked inside a seed cone hanging high on the branch of a giant tree, till one day the squirrel grabbed the cone and it scampered down the tree. He buried it in a special spot for a winter snack, and the seed rested underground for months. Luckily, the squirrel had a lot of special spots because he never came back. Nestled inside its cone, the seed waited. When it was ready, the seedling sprouted at the base of that giant tree. Centuries ago, this mighty tree was a tiny seedling too. Now it towered over all the other trees in the forest, strong and straight. It looked like it could survive anything. But no part of the forest is entirely free from danger. As small as it was, the seedling's roots reached underground and met the roots of other trees. Threaded between them was a silky net of fungi, a web that stretched from root to root and beyond. Through this web, the forest passed secrets. The trees talked to each other through their roots. They spoke of danger, of drought and pests. They spoke of what one tree needed and another had to give. The seedling began to listen. The giant tree with its huge crown gathered an abundance of sunlight. It soaked it up and it turned it into food. It took care to send the little seedling enough to nourish it. How did it know the seedling was one of its own? It's a mystery. Buried under the soil where their root tips intertwined. It was not only the tiny seedling that depended on the giant tree, but the rest of the forest did too. Larger than all the others, the giant tree sent nutrients through the underground web. It brought water up from deep in the earth. It housed the owl that nestled in its upper limbs and the coyote with its den at its foot. Day by day, the seedling inched taller. Then one night, everything changed. The sky came alive with lightning flashes. The forest swayed under the force of the winds, and thunder roared in the sky. Tucked safely down below, the seedling's needles barely rustled until, crack, a massive strike lit up the giant tree's crown. Thud, down went an uppermost branch. The animals of the forest scattered. The jay shrieked, the squirrel ran. For a moment, the giant tree lit up with an orange glow, and then darkness. In the morning, it was quiet. The giant tree had been struck. It had burned briefly, but it still stood tall. Down on the forest floor, the seedling was missing one of its branches, snapped off when a limb had fallen from the giant tree. Otherwise, it had escaped harm. But something was different. A shriek of golden light touched the seedling's needles. Instead of only drinking from its roots, it drank in the full light of the sun. And for the first time, it made its own food. After the storm, the animals returned to the forest. The squirrel began its seed cone collection again. The owl took a long nap. The forest waited. The forest listened. That's when the first winged beetle landed. The beetle sent out an odor which said, attack. Winging through the air, crawling over bark, beetles clustered on the giant tree and laid their eggs. The giant tree sent out an alarm, danger! The warning pulsed through the forest, passing through tree roots, carried by the web of fungi. Day after day, the beetles attacked, a small but persistent swarm. No more sugar flooded the underground web from the giant tree, just distress. And something unexpected happened. Through the threads of fungi from root tip to root tip, nutrients flooded. Not out from the giant tree, but toward it. The forest gave what it had so that the giant tree might live. And it did. Someday, with luck, the seedling would grow tall too. But for now, it drank deep through the web at its roots and waited and listened as the forest talked. All right. Thank y'all for listening with me. And now we'll be singing out our children for our faith formation in the back.
As we enter into this time of meditation, I invite you to get comfortable in your chairs and just breathe. Follow your breath and reflect on this following reading by Dr. Howard Thurman entitled, My High Resolve. Keep fresh before us the moments of our high resolve. despite the dullness and barrenness of the days that pass. If we search with due diligence, we can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But we had forgotten. At the time it was full-orbed, glorious, and resplendent. We were sure that we would never forget. We had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time. Our response was whole, clean, authentic. But little by little, there crept into our lives the dust and grit of the journey. Details, lower-level demands, all kinds of cross-currents. Nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, we would have fought it. Sorry, awkward page turn. Please ignore the awkward page turn. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, we would have fought it to the end and beyond. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, our hearts whisper, keep fresh before us the moments of our high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempest, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, we may not forget that to which our lives are committed. In good times or in bad, in fair weather or foul weather, we still have the work of keeping this beloved community going. And part of that is providing the resources that we need for the essentials, because we have bills to pay. And that's just the way it is. So anyway, that being said, I invite the ushers to come take the morning collection. And for those of us participating on Zoom, the information on where you can give online will be displayed shortly. If our ushers will come forward.
I usually keep my, my sermons to about 15 minutes. This is a touch longer. A couple weeks ago, I shared some reflective thoughts on the first half of our proposed new covenant. And to refresh our hearts and minds on that conversation, and also to not leave people out if they weren't there that day, I'm going to offer a couple brief reminders about that conversation. Now, here are the words of that first half of the covenant themselves. We covenant to serve our mission within, among, and beyond us. We covenant to love and affirm each other and our planet, celebrating multicultural, interdependent wholeness. We covenant to live with integrity, embodying our values through practice and play. And we covenant to expand our awareness of power and privilege, centering those most burdened by injustice. To serve our mission within, among, and beyond us refers to the fact the mission here is our boss. All our work moves us toward our mission, and our mission is to create a beloved community. We do that not just among the congregants of this church, yet also within our individual souls and beyond our church altogether. In the second stanza, we covenant to love and affirm each other and our planet, celebrating multicultural, interdependent wholeness. We are here to love and help each other feel whole and full of worth, because we, each of us, are whole and full of worth, full of worthiness, that quality of being good enough. And we do so in the context of a rich, multicultural, diverse intersection of human identities and human culture, as well as our interdependence with nature herself. We cannot divorce ourselves from the myriad intersectional ecosystems of the universe. And it's the diversity of those ecosystems and everything in them that allows life to emerge, that allows life to flourish. That complexity of individual and culture and nature should be revered and celebrated. In our next stanza, we covenant to live with integrity, embodying our values through practice and play. Now, living with integrity isn't always easy. In fact, it can be quite hard. And there are so many circumstances in our lives that can push us away from what we hold to be our deepest and truest values and principles. Sometimes we need to develop that integrity, grow into integrity. We promise within this new covenant, we will try at least to embody the values that we state are important to us. We promise to match our actions with our words more and more every day. We're not just saying the pretty things, we're doing the things too. We also actively integrate ourselves as individuals with community. Now, both of these evolving processes happen through practice and play. Two methods proven to be effective spiritually and otherwise. Methods which move us into that next step of spiritual development, which spark our transformation toward beloved community. I'll talk more about this spiritual process near the end of my reflection today. In the last stanza I previously explored, we covenant to expand our awareness of power and privilege, centering those most burdened by injustice. Now, to me, this is the most important new piece of the covenant that hasn't appeared in any variation of previous covenants here at UUCA. It also matches the direction of Unitarian Universalism as a whole. It matches promises that you and I have already made to each other through my minister's agreement. Now, I hope that we can integrate that legal promise with a spiritual promise, a promise that is far more compelling to me, at least. Now, this stanza acknowledges that in any given context, big or small, there is a power differential. And that power differential is created because of our intersectional identities as defined, as constructed by dominant culture. Overlapping identities like gender and sexuality, race and background culture, wealth or a lack thereof, even our body types have an impact. And though constructed, each of these overlapping identities have a real impact on our lives. They may not be real, but they still matter. And with this promise that we're hoping to have now is that we're not asking individual folks to feel guilty about their own power and privilege, which we all have some of. The fact that we live in this country automatically means we have more privilege than folks living with famine and war and pestilence and other major problems in other countries. Instead of guilt, we're just asking for a general awareness so that we all might be able to center, lean toward, amplify the folks who get left out so often, or who are even victims of state-sanctioned violence. These are oppressions created by systems, dominant cultures, which empower some and disempower others. And we make these promises understanding that we're not trying to give up power to do so. Because the power we have, the innate power we have as individuals and as a community, give us more ability to positively impact the world, center those who generally have less power in the world, ultimately liberating us all and moving us toward beloved community. And understanding the context of dominant systems and cultures that invade all our lives allows me personally to offer individuals who cause harm themselves a degree of grace or forgiveness or mercy. It becomes much easier to call folks back into love instead of calling people out or punishing, which leads me to our yet unexplored stanzas. Starting with, we covenant to embrace mutual accountability for our impact, making amends and returning to love. It's important that you hear those last couple words, returning to love. Words that convey essentially the same message as offering each other grace. We will mess up as individuals and as a community. We will. I mess up all the time. With the best of intentions, we still do things that harm others, especially folks who are harmed more often, and that feed the feedback loop of inequity and injustice. And it's that negative impact that matters, not the intent. This stanza is an acknowledgement of that, yet also acknowledges the deeply Unitarian Universalist ideal that we ultimately desire a return to relationship when those mistakes are made, a return to love. We are here to create beloved community, loving and affirming each other. And that takes some real courage sometimes, some real guts, some real vulnerability, especially when you've been hurt so many times before. But for us to restore love, the harming person, the offending person, or people need to make amends, be held accountable by each other here in the community. There's a mutuality to this accountability. Yes, there is individual responsibility, yet we cannot remove ourselves from relationship. We live in a relational society. We nurture a relational religion, which is why mutual accountability is basically a relational transformation from the words, take responsibility for my individual actions in our current covenant. Individual responsibility must still happen, yet again, it's in the context of mutual relational accountability. And we are all accountable to and for each other. Just like the trees from our earlier story, we cannot be separated from one another, metaphorically and scientifically. And we focus our resources on the place where harm is happening. because it helps us all. In our human world, making amends, taking responsibility, means that we have to apologize, own up, and then change our behavior. Try not to do the thing again. Then we do the work, that long, sometimes uncomfortable work of healing that harm. People on both sides of a conflict work to come back into a right, loving relationship. And yet, and this is a really important yet here, we return to love within a context of power and privilege. Another important reason for all of us to expand our awareness of how power and privilege play a role in our lives. We can be a little harder on some than others, and more patient with those whose harm was amplified by their identity. Patient with them as they figure out when the right time to return to relationship might be for them, never forcing forgiveness or grace, especially if the harmful behavior hasn't been amended, hasn't been changed. And whatever time length is needed, though, and this is the really cool part about Unitarian Universalism that's been here forever, we still ultimately return to love. We still find universal salvation in beloved community. Our next stanza of the covenant reads, "We covenant to seek truth and understanding, exploring with curiosity, reason, and wonder." This is an important line to be included for many of us, and I'm glad we did. Reason really is an important aspect of who we are and who we have been. And yet, I want to name the purposeful complexity and ambiguity inherent in these words. The way it's stated, it kind of insulates us from accidentally reinforcing hegemonic norms, dominant ideas about what constitutes reason, what is truth. Because this is a relational covenant, this line is primarily about seeking truth and understanding with each other. First and foremost, this is relational. When we get into a conflict or when we're thriving, it is an amazing thing for us to find out each other's truth, each other's story, because this allows us to be more whole and more connected. And we do so through a loving curiosity, actively wondering about each other's truth, each other's story. And to do so, to discover that truth and gain understanding, we listen. With an open heart, we listen to understand. Now, this line can also point us to something bigger than interpersonal relationships. Doing the work of finding out what truth is, understanding the world and how it works, and exploring with reason to prevent us from creating new idols is extremely important to us as UUs. It's important for us to have a why for the work we're doing, because we want to grow. And the thing is, reason exists in many forms. For example, subjective and objective reason, subjective and objective truth. With all our subjective truths combined, maybe, just maybe, we can approach the objective truth. Yet once again, since each of us as individuals have the direct experience of life and of the divine, and our lives are impacted by the inequitable ways that dominant culture impacts our lives, it is important to expand our awareness of power and privilege so that we might center the experience, the truth, the reason of those who are most oppressed, most burdened by the weight of injustice. And this inclusive expansion of awareness itself is steeped in reason and love. And so this line is purposefully open-ended, both in terms of the scope of it and what these words even mean. not to get too nerdy, but there's a philosophical branch called epistemology. Does anybody know that word, epistemology? Nice, okay. Epistemology is the study of how we know what we know, how we arrive at knowledge. And people arrive at knowledge, truth, in a myriad of ways. Some use the scientific method, some deductive, some more inductive, some of us are intuitive, and as subjects, human subjects, not objects, it is important for us to recognize the existence of subjective truth as an act of love. With all due respect to facts, which are also important, especially right now, it's at least equally as important for us to seek others' subjective truth. And this exploration, wherever it may take us, is an act of compassion, reason, and respect. And the best part of this search is the experience of mystery and awe and wonder and meaning-making that comes from knowing the world better, knowing each other better, and knowing ourselves better. Now, alongside that search for truth and understanding, it's imperative as a church, as a religious organization, as a living faith, as we're sometimes called, that we acknowledge that there are things that we do here that are spiritual in nature. Even if you don't personally use the language of reverence as coined by former UUA President Reverend Dr. Bill Sinkford, words like faith and spiritual, worship and sacred, blessing and holy, and many do love those words and find great meaning in them. Even if you don't use them, we are nonetheless developing something here deep in us, at our very core. And that something is so important for us to live whole, holy, flourishing lives, interdependently, with trust and loyalty to all those with whom we're in relationship. And the word faith is the best word to capture all of that in a single word. Which brings us to our final stanza. We covenant to support each other's spiritual development, encouraging faith and transformation. The process of spiritual development is a combination of grounding ourselves, centering our souls, nurturing our faith, as we also simultaneously expand ourselves in who we can be, as we transform into the most connected, selfless, loving, world-altering person we can be, and encouraging others along that journey, journeying alongside each other. That shared spiritual journey is such a gift. Now, I know that faith is one of those words of reverence that doesn't feel quite right for some folks. So I want to briefly address its inclusion here again. In this context, in our context, the meaning of faith is twofold. First, faith is a loyalty to each other, a trust that we're all acting in the best interest of each other, our mission, and our community at large. Think kind of acting in good faith. You've heard that phrase before. Faith is also the thing, the idea, the science, the feeling, the philosophy, and yes, maybe even the God that keeps our feet on the ground among all the hardships of life. That gives us a centering so that we can continue to move forward, to not unravel into despair. Faith is our roots. And deep, connected roots keep us safe, healthy, and alive, just like the trees from our earlier story. Roots that connect us to those around us through the miracle of nature. Now, faith holds us close, yet we also need to be set free from pre-existing ideas of how things are and should be, set free from the ways that systems tell us we need to be, set free from existing behaviors that aren't necessarily living into beloved community. And that's where the transformation bit comes in. That's where our wings set us free. That's where our branches stretch into the sky. And as we move through our spiritual development together, we are finding ways to deepen our souls and to release our souls simultaneously, relationally. Spirituality is deep and expansive, faithful and transformative. And we owe it to each other and ourselves to encourage everyone in our community of communities to nourish our spirits, center ourselves with faith, with whatever that is that offers you faith, and stretch the wings of our souls outward beyond our own lives. I've spoken about my very first ministerial mentor, Reverend Jack Donovan, a few times. Now, his notion of spiritual growth was the continual expansion of your worldview from an individual mindset to include more and more people, loving more and more people, decentering ourselves in this grand scheme of things so that we can realize something bigger, something grander. Community. Now, there's one more portion that we've drafted here in this new covenant that isn't necessarily part of the covenant per se. It's kind of a blessing to the covenant. And it's kind of naming, very specifically naming some ends that we'd like to see emerge from living into our mission here together, living into this covenant. And naming that the covenant itself, the promise itself that we're making with one another, is a living, sacred thing. That our relationship to it and our relationships to each other deserve awe and reverence, because we deserve awe and reverence. We are sacred. Every part of us is sacred. Every part of us deserves awe and reverence. And this is a religious promise in a religious context. Sacred is synonymous with religious. It is something that is binding us. It is a promise that binds us, a sacred promise. And so may we, through these words, through this sacred living promise, may we together, may we find meaning, liberation, and joy. May we find that thing we've always been searching for that allows us to live a full life. May we be released from the shackles of ideas and systems and power struggles, allowing us to be free and liberated. May living into this covenant open us to our wholeness after being told in so many ways that who we are is unacceptable. And through all this, may we feel joy in our hearts, individually, together, interdependently, and may we create beloved community. Blessed be.
The fire of commitment.
closing words today are entitled The Fire at the Center by Reverend Joan Johnson Lewis. There is a fire at the center of each of us, a fire that, if nourished, brings warmth and light and courage into our lives.
Every other person also has a fire at their center. Our actions in this world can nourish the fire of others, or, depending on our choices, our actions can dampen, even extinguish those fires.
As we dampen or extinguish the fire of others, we dampen or extinguish our own.
As we encourage and nourish the fire of others, we encourage and nourish our own fire.
By encouraging and nourishing the fire at the center of each other, we bring even greater light and warmth and courage to this world and to ourselves. This week, may you nourish and encourage the fire at the center of others, and may we be nourished and encouraged in our center.